right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we're discussing the key streamers and potential sleepers in Week 16 that could get you to your fantasy title. Discuss that, all that, and more. Starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And we have a trifecta today, folks. A lot of fun. Honestly, I couldn't keep the guys away at this point. They were fighting for jockeying. They both were like, I want to do it. And I was like, you know what? Both you guys can do the show today. I'm excited to have you both on to talk QB, tight end, defensive streamers. Oh, you know what? I might even sprinkle in a kicker or two and some sleeper potential flex plays that can help you get you to your fantasy title today. Derek, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Survived my matchups for the week one. So looking forward to the next round of the playoffs.
Yeah, man. Honestly, I got a couple leagues myself. Ben, how you doing, sir?
Yeah, man, going well. Enjoying life. My parents had their 40th wedding anniversary 2 days ago, and it was great, and then made me extremely sick for the last 24 to 48 hours. But I'm fine now, ready to talk some football.
That a boy. That's why I like to hear you. Back off the schneid. He was limited practice on Wednesday, but he's back in full, ready to go.
DNP. Full DNP.
All right, DNP. Oh no! Oh geez, you're getting that sleeper link update where it said questionable. His status changed from healthy to questionable. It's only Wednesday, folks. None of those matter anyway. But we're glad Ben's on the show today on a short week. By the way, usually he's here only on Fridays for us. But honestly, Ben played a little Thursday night football in our world. I like this right now. It's good stuff. So today's show, really, guys, I kind of want to keep this free flowing and talk a little ball. Honestly, today is really kind of for people. If you're in Week 16, you're in the semifinals, that's great. But there's a lot of things have changed a lot over the last few days. A couple injuries, QB changes have kind of changed the dialogue here a little bit. But I kind of want to go into it by piece. So obviously, let's talk about the most important position in the NFL. Can debate if it's the most important position in fantasy is the quarterback position. Derek, go throw to you first. When you talk about Week 16, who is your ideal QB streamer for this week? And give us maybe an example or two of the kind of quarterback you would start them over.
Yeah, so for me, I'm pretty much going to stay away from, some of the you mentioned the new quarterbacks out there. To me, they are completely off the board. I wouldn't even consider them a streamer. What I do consider though a streamer is someone like Drake May. I mean, he's been pretty good, but to me, when you're talking about semifinals and the playoffs, do you really want to leave your fantasy quarterback position to Drake May against the Bills in Buffalo? So that one's a tough one for me. So that would be my line between, do I take a chance on more established quarterback, or, do I just roll the dice? And I mean, I love Drake May. Don't get me wrong. He's probably going to be a target in most of my drafts next year. But it's just really hard for me to trust him this week.
So
I have a situation in one the league that Matt and I share. We have both Jordan Love and Baker Mayfield. So that's the kind of decision that I'm looking at this week. Which one of those two do we play? And frankly, I think Baker Mayfield is still somewhat of a streaming option at quarterback. I don't understand why, but I mean, he is quarterback 7 for the year, but I think in many cases he still doesn't have that level of trust that we give to someone like Jordan Love or maybe even like Tua. Tua is the same way. We trust Tua. He has this level of trust, but do we play someone like Baker over Tua, or Jordan Love? So those are the kind of decisions that I'm looking at this week.
Yeah, I got to disagree. I think Baker's he's rostered heavily, and I think people are in. And by the way, that Dallas game, when you get to December, having like a nice dome game against a defense who's going to not have Trayvon Diggs, who just lost one of their key linebackers too, Baker's like, if you want shootout potential, that game could be fun. I don't really know what to feel about Cooper Rush, who's a player I want to talk about in a minute, but throwing it back down to you, Ben. Obviously, Drake May's name has been floated around a little bit here. What's kind of your thoughts on Drake May, and who's your kind of QB streamer this week?
I've kind of got my streamers in like different tiers. There's the guys that aren't really streamers, like a Baker Mayfield, like a Sam Darnold, where they're probably owned in enough leagues, but you might have two quarterbacks, and therefore you need to choose between two. For me, guys like Mayfield and Darnold, they're top 8 options this week. You absolutely have to start them. Then there's these guys that are kind of okay players, but they've got better matchups. So we're talking about guys like a Jordan Love or a Bo Nix, where they're kind of solid players and the matchup's okay. You can feel pretty good about starting them without knowing that there's going to be a massive amount of upside. And then there's those streamers who have the tough matchups, but they should be better most weeks. So someone like a Jared Goff, usually you'd be confident about starting him, but he takes on Chicago, so that's really iffy. Brock Purdy takes on Miami, who's conceded the fewest points to quarterbacks so far this season. Again, solid play, but can you feel good about starting him this week? And then if you can't get any of those guys, then I start thinking about the Drake Mays. And before I even talk about a Drake May or a Cooper Rush, for me, Aaron Rodgers is a guy that I feel okay about. He's finally broken out the last couple of weeks. I know breakout's not really the word for Aaron Rodgers, but for this season, certainly the last couple of weeks have been his best. And he takes on the Rams, who are top 10 in points conceded against quarterbacks. So before I think about any of these other guys, like your Mays, like your Rushes, for me, it's Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I one of the things I really like about the site and by the way, just to plug, we have the slot versus wide, but we also have a lot of fun split tools, home versus road, win versus loss. And I've always liked to look at, especially this time of year, because there are guys like Jared Goff, by the way, who on the road in Chicago is not the same guy. And that's not just Goff. That's a lot of people playing in Chicago, and especially Chicago in December. That's definitely not a risk that I personally want to take. But there's other guys where, like Matthew Stafford and Baker Mayfield, when you go to their home road splits, there really isn't much of a difference. But the question is, do we feel really comfortable about Matthew Stafford, for example, traveling across country for a 1:00 game on the East Coast? Now, I know the Jets have been a little bit up and down from the standpoint of playing good defense, but, last year he did this against the Giants. He played against the Giants on the road. He threw for 300 yards, only 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and he was kind of meh. But then just a month ago, he had a monster game against the Patriots, kind of the same situation. Now, granted, it's later in the year. Weather might be a little bit colder. But I guess my question is, like, Derek, when you're kind of navigating some of this stuff, is there quarterbacks, maybe dome quarterbacks like Goff and Stafford, where now they're going to be outdoors in December? Are you kind of hands off those situations, not worth the risk, or does the matchup still really matter for you?
Generally, I'm probably going to default to the matchups more than not. But yeah, for someone like Goff, you mentioned Goff, he's been just fantastic in the fantasy this year. But yeah, going to Chicago, that's going to be a tough one. I mean, you had mentioned Stafford going east. Another quarterback that is coming east it's an outdoor quarterback, but Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray kind of fits that mold to me as well. I mean, where does he fit in? Does someone like Aaron Rodgers, for instance, or the other quarterbacks we were talking about? So, yeah, it's tough. You ideally, like you said, there's games. Saints going to Green Bay or the Bucs going to the Cowboys. Even the 49ers going to Miami. I mean, those games you want to take advantage of because those could be potential shootouts. But, someone like Stafford going to the Jets, that's a tough call. I would probably try to
haunting my dreams right now.
Yeah.
I have him. I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like I can really see it going two ways. I can see Aaron Rodgers, like Ben just brought up Aaron Rodgers. Like he's starting to vibe. He's starting to get his stuff together. And if they're going to put up points, by the way, this is an old school rivalry from their Lions-Packers days. And they have like a friendly rivalry. I can't imagine Aaron Rodgers going bananas against the Rams. But like the Rams front is not the same as what Aaron Rodgers just faced. Like, I'm sorry, but like he faced like the Jags. And you're like, okay, I know he had a good game against Miami, but like it's not like he threw for multiple touchdowns. I think he only I don't think he threw for any touchdowns in that game, just threw for 300 yards. But he played the Jags, right? So, like, we have to remember the Jags are the best matchup for quarterbacks. Now he's facing the Rams. I know it's still a top 10 matchup, but the Rams' offensive front, their defensive line is, like, legit. And, like, that's the difference between the Jags. And, like, the biggest problem with Rodgers hasn't been his weapons around him. It's been the line. So it's like, can they muck up that game a little bit? And now you have Stafford on the road, maybe not as high scoring as we thought. I do have one, the Drake May thing is extremely interesting because Buffalo might be 20 degrees. The weather's forecast is like high teens, low 20s. That could be a huge factor there. But the other factor that the Drake May here, though, is garbage time. Because, like, Buffalo could really beat them up. But, like, Drake May has kind of shown that, like, little garbage time is not a bad thing. He can just rack up stats. Like, Ben, is there a scenario where does that factor into, like, hey, you know what? Like, I think that Buffalo, by the way, who just got smoked by Stafford, smoked by Goff, they haven't really been that good outside of that Purdy game. Is there any kind of validity to that mindset where May can just rack up those stats because Buffalo is at home this week?
Drake May kind of reminds me of like Blake Bortles from like 6 or 7 years ago, where half of his stats were garbage time. He's using his legs, he's throwing random touchdown. That's always in the fourth quarter. The problem with someone like a Drake May in that situation, I mean, how bad does the score have to be before they just take all the starters off? Like, that's really the risk you have. Because May's so young, there's less risk of that than there are in other situations, and that's why you're not as worried about it in this case. But I mean, it does get to the point where there's kind of like a very clear window where they still need to be within a certain amount of scores before they just bench everyone. And all of a sudden you're getting no stats at all. So I don't think about that too much, but certainly against someone like a Buffalo, I mean, I don't know. I can't start May this week. I just can't do it. There's so many other options. I can't imagine a league where you can't access someone like an Aaron Rodgers or a Cooper Rush, and therefore you're forced to May. Like, I would rather those other guys. At least they're at home in better matchups.
Talk to me about Cooper Rush.
I mean, realistically, we've seen he's been solid when he's been at home. He takes on Tampa, who concede a lot of points against quarterbacks, like the second most points in the league against quarterbacks. Rush is at least moving the ball and passing it. I mean, he's averaging 2 touchdowns a game across the last 4 weeks. He's not passing for a lot of yards, but at least he's getting those touchdowns. Gives him a little bit of a floor. They've all been really good matchups, but this is a good matchup as well. He's a solid play. He's going to give you 15 to 20 points. If you're the favorite, but you're struggling at quarterback, that's who you want. If you want upside, you don't go for any of these guys. None of these guys have any upside at all.
I guess, Derek, to kind of wrap up the discussion here, like dome game, like, listen, I feel confident that Baker's going to do his thing. By the way, I love that Jalen McMillan, player that we'll probably talk about later, has emerged in that offense. Mike Evans, by the way, nothing better than a Mike Evans incentive to get to 1,000 yards every week, because like they're just balling out right now. And so like I feel confident that Baker, with no Trayvon Diggs, some injuries to that Cowboys linebacking core too, that Baker's going to do his thing. So does that give Cooper Rush maybe more of a appeal, because they're going to have to put up points? And by the way, Tampa, they're not going to be able just to run the ball down Tampa's throat. Like, that's not how you beat Tampa. So is there any validity maybe to Cooper Rush being an ideal streamer this week?
Yeah, I think there is, actually, for many of the reasons Ben just explained. And, he's looked more – I've watched the last few weeks, and, when he first came in, I mean, that first game, he just looked out of sorts. But he's looked more and more comfortable. He and CeeDee Lamb are starting to gel a little bit better. Like you said, he's not throwing for a lot of yards, but he is throwing for touchdowns, like Ben said. And that's a game you want to have a piece of. So, would I consider starting someone like Cooper Rush over Matthew Stafford, like we talked about? I would. Drake May. I like Drake May, infinitely better. But yes, I think this would be the week that you would, if you're going to take a chance, you would take a chance on someone like Cooper Rush over someone like Drake May or Matthew Stafford, or even Kyler Murray. Someone like that as well. So, definitely that matchup looks like one that you should explore.
All right. I honestly, listen, when I first was going through this process, there's 3 guys that were in my league. I had Justin Herbert. Honestly, short week. He just hasn't looked right. And honestly, I'm kind of just trying to stay away from that Thursday night game from a Justin Herbert standpoint. It just doesn't really seem like – by the way, Justin Herbert is like 2 different players. First half, Justin Herbert is like prime MVP like Aaron Rodgers. Second half, Justin Herbert all of a sudden turns into a pumpkin. I don't understand it, but like he gets all – last week he had 17 fantasy points and he finished with 17 fantasy points in the second half. It's anyway. But my point is like, what I'm looking at through the situation was Cooper Rush, in my opinion, just seems very safe right now. Like you're probably going to get 225 and 2 from him. And then, but the question is like if you're a 6 seed, for example, and you're a heavy underdog, let's say you're facing the 1 seed this week, does that change your mindset, Ben, a little bit where, yeah, I might need that upside play and maybe Cooper Rush doesn't offer that, so maybe I do pivot to Drake May? Is there like a scenario where that would factor into your thought process here?
100% yes, though I don't think that Drake May has that much more upside. Like, he's against Buffalo. Buffalo's got a really good pass defense. Like, they've conceded, like, bottom 10 points against quarterbacks this season. It's just not the direction I'd go in. Like, if I need upside, I'd go for a Matthew Stafford. I'd go for I don't know, Caleb Williams. That could be it could be possible that he scores a lot of points against Detroit, who do concede on occasion, but they just score so many points that they're always winning. Like, that's the sort of situation you go to. Heck, if you want upside, go Aiden O'Connell. I mean, he's taking on the Jags. He put 340 yards on KC a couple of weeks ago. He's going to be starting this week. Like, there are guys with actual upside. I don't know. Look, we'll come back next week, and I'll mention Aiden O'Connell. You go, oh, yeah, okay. When he finishes as a top 12 quarterback, like, there is a ceiling there that's way higher than all of these other guys in Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, I just think the Drake May, if you watch the Bills recently, it might be a little bit to do with the fact that like they were on the road against the Rams and the Lions, but those offenses just completely smoked them. And then outside of that, like, I mean, Buffalo quietly has creeped up in their top 10 in yards, passing yards, and also top 10 in passing touchdowns this season because the last few weeks have been completely lopsided. Even Mahomes, 3 touchdown passes, Joe Flacco, 272 and 2. So it's kind of interesting where, something about the Bills' offense is rolling. I do think, go ahead.
When was the last time Drake May had a top 5 fantasy finish ever? I'll answer it for you. It's never happened, ever. He's never had a top 5 fantasy finish. He's only got 1 top 9 fantasy finish. Like, he has no upside. There's just no upside with Drake May. He does not finish as a top 5 quarterback. Other guys do. Drake May doesn't.
All right. Listen, Ben, I get it, man. Don't yell at me, all right? I'm just here to try to spitball a little bit here, all right? I'm in the moment right now where, like, I was thinking, because I'm the lowest seed. I made the playoffs. I'm facing the 1 seed in my league now this week, and I'm like, like Cooper Rush, by the way, was my first thought, like, this week. Like, because I'm like, I know he's at home, by the way, and I love the setup where you kind of feel like you're going to and by the 6 point per passing touchdown league, you're probably going to get 2 touchdowns. You're going to get probably like 225 passing yards. It's very safe. But I'm like thinking to myself, like, there's a scenario where Tampa Bay's rolling. And by the way, because Mike Evans has his incentives to make 1,000 yards receiving, they could throw a little bit. They can get that ball roll. There is a little bit more where Cooper Rush, there's a weird scenario where Cooper Rush, like last week he threw for 3 touchdowns, which is awesome. But, I mean, that's kind of lucky because Rico Dowdle dominated, but he had 0 touchdowns. So, a little fluky. But anyway, let's move on to tight end streamers. I'm going to give it to you. Let's talk about this one first here, Derek. What are your thoughts about your ideal tight end streamer this week? We had some guys kind of emerge last week, like a Bretton Strange player. Is there is he kind of a guy where you're going to kind of chase the points, or is there another name that really comes to mind?
Yeah, Bretton Strange is actually one that I've been keeping an eye on. I picked him up before last week's game. When Ingram went out, and I didn't play him, but yeah, that's a typical tight end streamer at this point of the year who could really turn into a really fantasy asset. To me, I think the streamer line is someone like Jonnu Smith. He's not your ideal every week starter at tight end, but with the home matchup, let's see, where was it? Where are the Dolphins? Home matchup. I know they're playing at home. San Francisco, yeah, coming to town. Although those linebackers in San Francisco, they're getting healthy, but that would be one I think that would be worth streamer consideration. Someone like Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, Jonnu is in the top 10 in ownership percent. He's just been completely dominating. But would you start Jonnu over your typical quote unquote studs? Let's say, for example, let's find a guy that has a tougher matchup. I guess Kelsey.
Like Sam Laporta is a good example. We go in Chicago. We already talked about Jared Goff. The kind of the stigma that he has outdoors. Do you go with someone like Laporta over Jonnu Smith? I think that's a tough call. I think I would lean Jonnu Smith. Actually,
yeah, all right. I would say, because the one thing I will say is the home road split tool would probably be my tiebreaker there, because in my mindset, Jonnu's earned tight end one every single week consideration, and honestly, Sam Laporta hasn't really. I think the problem is the name. If you just zoom out and just look at how they've played, you're like, it's Jonnu at home, even against the 49ers. So, but Ben, I know that's a really tough match. I mean, honestly, San Francisco's no joke against tight end, so that is a tougher call. But Ben, kind of, what's your thoughts about the tight end situation? Is there kind of a deeper name other than Brenton Strange that kind of stands out? Are you fading Brenton Strange? What's your thoughts here about tight end streamers?
I mean, firstly, there's only three guys I would start ahead of Jonnu Smith, and that's Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and George Kittle. Other than that, Jonnu Smith's like a number 4, number 5 for me this week. You absolutely must start him. I think it's interesting, kind of him versus TJ Hawkinson, but none of those guys are particularly streamers anyway. I think the streaming options I think someone like a Tucker Kraft is someone who's still available in a surprising amount of leagues, and I don't really understand why. He's been top 10 on the season. He's a little bit boom bust. He gets New Orleans. They will score some points there. I think he's a viable option. I love Brenton Strange this week. I think he's a really good option. If you want to go a little bit deeper, for example, you can go for someone like a Stone Smart. There's a little bit of risk there, but certainly we've seen that he's someone that they're willing to use, and he has at least the possibility of getting some big plays. So if you're desperate for someone, you can go that way, but my preference would be someone like a Strange, a Pat Frymuth, a Hunter Henry, all of those guys, if they're available in your leagues, they're viable streaming options.
So I will say this, Hayden Hurst was activated and could play, and that could throw a wrench in the Stone Smart situation. I don't really know how they feel about Hayden Hurst at this point. He was supposed to be the starter, and then Will Disley kind of took over, and then he got hurt. But that's something that could be something to watch if he's active. I got to ask, Tucker Kraft or Brenton Strange? Derek, I'll go to you first.
I'm going with Kraft. At home, he and Love are connecting. I'm going to go with Tucker Kraft.
I also have Kraft, but it is very close for me. I do. The Raiders are a really good matchup for tight ends, and I wouldn't surprise me if in a couple of days' time I feel differently, but I mean, the Raiders have conceded the 4th most points to tight ends so far this season. The Saints less so. It more goes to the wide receivers, but Kraft kind of plays a bit like a wide receiver enough that you don't feel too bad about that. So for me, they're really, really, really close. I think in a PPR, I'd go with Strange. Maybe in a half PPR, I'd go with Kraft.
Great. We'll have to revisit this on Friday. Just like, yeah, I got both. The problem with the Packers don't throw as much as you think. And trust me, someone who's had Kraft, he's very touchdown. I mean, every tight end is touchdown dependent. But, like, same thing with Pat Frymuth. Like, all these guys seem to get, like, 3 catches, 40-something yards, and you're just banking on them getting into the end zone. I understand. Like, the Brenton Strange, I know that Mac Jones threw the ball a bunch last week. I think it was like 46 pass attempts. But it's very rare that you see a tight end can get 12 targets. And to me, like, double-digit targets is no joke. And by the way, Mac Jones has really hyper-focused on the tight end. It was Evan Ingram before them. If you look at the game logs, the tight ends are getting a lot of looks through Mac Jones playing quarterback. And by the way, even last year, we saw it last year with this offense, Evan Ingram was a stud. So I'm with Strange right now. But obviously, I value the team's opinion, so I'll be flip-flopping all week. And then when I make the wrong decision, I'll have a mental breakdown. So I'm excited about that.
And one thing, we're seeing, too, with the tight end position this week especially is the quarterback injuries and or the quarterback changes. Tight ends like Juwan Johnson, Noah Fant, David Njoku, those are – Njoku would be an every week starter, most likely with Jameson at quarterback, but now he is trending to come back. I see, but he's probably not now. He's going to be a tough play. Same with Kyle Pitts. I mean, he's been a tough play anyway, but just the situation there at Atlanta just makes him almost a non-play as well. So this week's actually going to be tough for tight ends, I think, because there's just so many question marks out there, not even necessarily at the tight end position, but at the quarterback position. That's going to affect tight ends.
It's going to be really tough to trust Browns this week. Listen, Njoku, it's a smash matchup against Cincinnati. It really is. But like his injury on top of the quarterback change, to be honest with you, I don't know if I trust it. It's going to be tough to start him knowing he's limited with this, by the way, and the passing offense loses all of its volume when you don't have Jameis or Joe Flacco in there. And now you're kind of going with this guy who's going to be more mobile, more conservative. So yeah, that's a tough call, but I agree. I think for me, when it comes down to it, is like with Brenton Strange, like I'll feel a lot better about starting him if Aiden O'Connell starts. Because the one thing I am worried about with Desmond Ridder, we saw what could happen. Those games turned very ugly. If you got Desmond Ridder on one side and then, the ball's not moving on both teams, it gets very defensive minded. At least I feel like Aiden O'Connell will start, could put up points against Jacksonville. I mean, Ben just flat out called him a deep name to monitor for a streamer. I just feel more confident in the game flow that you'll get a little bit more volume with Strange versus like just a grow. Because listen, the Raiders have no problem mucking it up. Like they're the type of team right now where they'll try to win 13-10. But you're hoping maybe a little bit more of what we saw in the Kansas City game, where Aiden O'Connell showed a little bit, and there's just more upside there. So I agree. I think Brenton Strange might be my favorite play this week, but Tucker Kraft, like the one thing that worries me is New Orleans. That game could just be a disaster. I mean, like they're on the road in Green Bay. One defense, it could just be like it was a few weeks ago. Who did they face? The Packers, and they dominated. I think it was San Francisco, ironically enough, where they completely blew the doors off them in Lambeau, and no one really did anything that week because it was not needed. But anyway, all right, let's jump down to defensive streamers. Now, is there an ideal defensive streamer that you're thinking about here, Derek?
Well, ironically, you just mentioned them, and it's the Green Bay Packers. Believe it or not, in my league, they were still on the waiver wire, probably because of the game just a couple weeks ago against Detroit, which was a shootout. People moved away from Green Bay, but they were on our waiver wire, and we picked them up overnight to be our streaming defense this week. And What I saw was their ownership was less than 50%, at least what I saw. So yeah, Spencer Rattler coming in at quarterback, Kamara probably not going to play. We saw Green Bay go to Seattle last week and limit the Seahawks to 250 total yards. So welcoming a really dejected New Orleans team in Lambeau this weekend, that's going to be a smash defensive play.
What are your thoughts here, Ben?
My favorites, I got two of them. Firstly, Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Browns. No Jameis now, but really hard to see the Browns scoring many points with DTR. No Nick Chubb there either. So I feel like that's an opportunity for them. They've been pretty solid with although I think potentially Sam Hubbard may be out. Not sure about that, but there is talk that maybe Sam Hubbard's out. But my favorite probably is a team I never thought I'd talk about the DST of, like within the last 3 years. The Atlanta Falcons. They've got 13 sacks, 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries the last 3 weeks. They coming out of their bye week, they've all of a sudden been incredible. It's not like they're playing terrible teams. Like they've played the Chargers and the Vikings. They're both very solid teams. But their pass rush all of a sudden is getting it done. And they take on the Giants with Drew Lock. Drew Lock looked awful last time he started. I can imagine the Falcons having another very solid game this week.
Yeah. Go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say, ironically, I think a defense that I would never consider coming out of my mouth would be the Cincinnati Bengals, which you discussed before. But those are good polls. Definitely. That's really, you're looking at those matchups and the quarterback changes and other injuries. And boy, trusting the Cincinnati Bengals as your semifinal defense, that takes some stones.
Yeah, I would say
they've been top 12 the last 3 weeks. So
yeah, you know what? It's I think Lou Amarillo is getting a bad rap. Like this year, prior to this year, the Bengals, he was like a head coaching candidate. Like he was a great defensive mind. And I know the personnel's changed a lot for them, but they're figuring it out. But in the grand scheme of things, it's all about matchups. And like, I don't know the DTR thing. Like he hasn't necessarily shown anything. It makes sense that they're trying to see what the kid has. I mean, he's only still very young, but like, yeah. The other one that I'm kind of interested in a little bit is the Raiders. If you're looking to go even deeper, I know Max Crosby's is out now, but like they're just the way they want to play the game is they want to keep it real low scoring and they want to muck things up. And that's how it's been with the Raiders. And now they get the Jags, who, by the way, Mac Jones has looked okay, but like he turns the ball over, he takes sacks. And to be honest with you, I think watching last week, we can kind of see a similar potential kind of game flow a little bit where, versus the Atlanta Falcons. So the Raiders were okay. Obviously, I think Atlanta is probably more of my priority. Green Bay is number one, then Atlanta for me before I get into these other names. But honestly, if you missed out on those names, I do think Cincinnati and I think the Raiders as a deeper name could potentially get you enough points to get you into the next round of the fantasy playoffs. All right, let's have some fun, folks. Let's wrap this puppy up with some fun sleeper flex plays. And before I'll close out the show with my favorite streamer kicker of the week, just because I know that's why everyone's here, so I'm saving it best for last. And by the way, make sure you join us on Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff. We do our Sunday live start sit show for 2 hours. We answer all your start sit questions. We do weather updates, injury updates. Basically, if you're not there, you don't know what's going on in the NFL. You might as well just not watch the whole weekend. So make sure you join us for Sunday live. Also, make sure you jump over to Razzball.com. Check out these great art. I think these guys still do some good stuff. I don't know. You're going to have to go check it out yourself. But I heard they write articles. I heard they do a really good job. And then finally, make sure you jump over to Razzball.com for our great tools. We have the slot versus wide points per game allowed tool. We also have a lot of fun tools over there like the home road splits. I'm telling you, the home road split tool, I mean, talk about the best. If you're in a coin flip situation, go to the home road split tool, the wins versus losses tools. Those are fun ways to kind of figure out your last flex spot every single week. Now, let's get to your fun sleeper flex plays. Give me what you got, Derek. Who's kind of the guy you're going to plant a flag on this week?
Well, the guy that I really want to plant a flag on, I believe, is someone who you're going to mention later. So I'm going to divert from that. I'm going to give you that platform later. And then I'm going to go to, ironically, I'm going to go to the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts game. And Tajay Spears is a flex play that we need to consider. And the reason is, I mean, he's back, he's healthy, but it's more actually Pollard's situation. I think that Spears makes for an interesting play. I was reading an article the other day, and if you're into conspiracy theories, you're probably right along with me. But we've seen this before. He's got performance bonuses coming up in his contract, about $1 million worth. He's about 150 yards, and he's 2 touchdowns away from about $1 million in performance bonuses. And what we saw last week in the game, let me pull it up just so I'm make sure I'm speaking correctly. He really didn't get a lot of run. He got to 29 snaps, 17 for 45 yards rushing. That's it. He only had 17 carries, whereas Tajay Spears, he did have the long run. Don't get me wrong, but he is more involved in the passing game. 87 yards receiving and a touchdown in the passing game, plus the rushing touchdown. So I could see a scenario where someone like Tajay Spears actually gets a little bit more run, or at least the more important ball carries, and Pollard kind of takes a back seat. So if you're into conspiracy theories, maybe you're with me. If you're just, Pollard is hurt as well, so that plays into it.
Yeah,
17
carries is a lot of carries.
It is. It is.
17 is a good number of carries, but you're not.
He didn't do much with it, and.
No, you're not wrong. But the other thing I'll say about that, though, is like they didn't have an option when Spears has been out all year. Like Spears has been out so much, and they had to put a lot of workload on Pollard. And to be honest with you, he's not holding up. Like he's banged up. He's not practicing Wednesdays and Thursdays. And I think by the way, the Titans have nothing to play for. They're out of it, and they're starting a backup quarterback now. Like, why are you going to ride Tony Pollard into the ground? He got 28 carries in a game, 24, 21. That makes zero sense. So I think Spears, by the way, they got to see what Spears can do when he's healthy. So I do like the call on Spears because it does make a little sense there that they dial back Pollard, because what's the point of riding him into the ground, because they signed him to a contract.
Yeah, exactly. The conspiracy aside, I mean, if you're that organization and you're smart about it, you want him to go into the offseason, healthy or relatively healthy, rather than rehabbing, because, like you said, they're not playing for anything this year other than maybe a top draft pick. But no, that's the Giants. That's going to be the Giants. No. We're getting the top pick. Just let it go. Okay.
Giants are going to get the top pick. We're going to pick a quarterback. We're going to have a great rest of our lives. We're going to have a great time. Anyway, Ben, talk to me, man. What do you got for a sleeper for us?
I mean, firstly, on that Tajay Spears situation, I mean, they were behind by 2 scores really early, and we know that Spears is their passing back. And they couldn't run as soon as they ended up a couple of scores behind. So that's why Spears, I think, got so much action. Whenever they're chasing, whenever they're down by a couple of scores, we've seen them do that all season. Spears will have a bigger game. Having said that, he's someone you have to roster because Pollard might not play this week. And if he doesn't play, all of a sudden Spears becomes an option. People in that same category for me, Kendre Miller is a good option if Alvin Kamara doesn't play. We know that Miller's getting all the touches. Now, he doesn't get the touches when Kamara's playing. All of his touches last week came in the last quarter when Kamara was down. So you are going to have that opportunity to start Miller only if Kamara is out. And likewise, we know that there's no Nick Chubb. So I think that means Jerome Ford becomes an option. He's not a great option. You don't run very easily on the Bengals, but he's still a starting NFL running back. And in many leagues, that's enough. So I do think Jerome Ford is an option. He also tends to get used more in the passing game, and I feel like they're going to be chasing a lot more. I still think we see some Donta Foreman early on, so I think he's a viable option. And lastly, wide receivers. We know that the Lions are very generous to slot receivers, and we know they're taking on Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen had 86 yards and 2 touchdowns against him a couple of weeks ago, so Keenan Allen is my sleeper flex play as a wide receiver.
Kendre Miller, man. Listen, this is going to be a stone cold take. I don't care. I think he's a better runner right now than Alvin Kamara. And honestly, like, you watch them, he is special. Like, he has got some serious wiggle to him. And you're like, oh, wow, this guy's moving better than Alvin Kamara just on pure running plays. Now, receiving ability, obviously Kamara's elite. And by the way, Kamara's still good. But, like, I have Kamara in my one league that I'm in the semis. I have Kendre. I want Kamara to sit because the one thing I don't want is a limited Kamara, and then you have to start Kamara and he's splitting the work. And by the way, they're on the road against Green Bay, and you're dealing with all that hoopla. So I'd rather just sit Kamara. And by the way, I don't see why they would play him with the groin injury, make it worse when they're out of contention. So I think Kendre Miller is a great call. My guy's Jalen McMillan. Me and Ben actually talked about it last Friday, and it's just one of those things where Baker Mayfield and that offense is clicking. The other aspect of, though, is I just feel like when you're watching them play, Mike Evans just makes everything else work. Like, when you have that alpha number one who's getting all the attention, now you're having these other guys on the roster who are basically one-on-ones go out and make a play. And you saw the last 2 weeks with a healthy Mike Evans that Jalen McMillan had his best 2 games of the year. He's playing essentially the same number. He's running the same number of routes as Mike Evans right now. He's got a great perimeter matchup against the Cowboys, who are going to be down Trayvon Diggs most likely this week. And by the way, obviously in the Dome in Dallas, I think that there's a really good opportunity if you're really struggling for a flex play that Jalen McMillan has kind of emerged. Mostly because of the fact that defenses can't focus on him. They have Mike Evans, who, by the way, is trying to go for 1,000 yards, and they're going to be peppering with targets. So I expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, ironically, to throw a bunch because they want to get Mike Evans points, which is also going to help Jalen McMillan and company. So I'm really high on McMillan. Kendre Miller is another guy I really like. And here's another deeper name that I think I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on is Alexander Madison. The Jags are a dumpster fire. They are awful against running backs. And listen, there's going to be no Zamir White, and Sincere McCormick's on IR now too. And I know Amir Abdullah is their passing game back. Obviously. And the Raiders will be at home. Hopefully Aiden O'Connell plays. But if Aiden O'Connell's in, there's a scenario where, by the way, I didn't have a lot of fab. I actually just didn't even bother trying to get forward. I actually just paid down and got Alexander Mattison as a potential backup for me this week. What's your guys' thoughts about Alexander Mattison as a potential plug-and-play flex at home against the Jags? Go to you, Derek, first.
Yeah, in an emergency, I see where you're thinking and your logic is, but I watched a little bit of that game versus the Falcons, and he just doesn't look. Well, I say like the Madison of old, but the few times that we've seen him really run well, he just didn't look right. I mean, he averaged 3 yards per carry in his 7 rushing attempts last week against the Falcons. So the matchup is good. They are playing at home, and I do think Aiden O'Connell playing or starting makes a difference. We mentioned it a little bit earlier as well. So it does make a difference. I do like him a little bit better if O'Connell is under center, but I mean that's going to be like a break glass and emergency type play. If you're in that situation, you play. He's going to get some workload and he has potential, but to me he just doesn't look right. To be fair,
Sincere McCormick had 7 carries for 8 yards in that game. So Madison technically
he's the better of the two.
Yeah, so to be fair, maybe the Raiders, I think the Desmond Ridder situation. By the way, Desmond Ridder plays, don't even bother. I don't care. Yeah. Don't even break the glass. Like, just don't worry about the glass breaking at that point. Ben, I have a question for you. Half PPR question. Alexander Mattison or a Jalen McMillan type. Who is the kind of guy you're leaning towards there?
Madison's interesting because they are actually favourite, the Raiders, this week against the Jaguars, right, which seems kind of crazy. But in that sort of game flow, you would expect to see more Madison than Amir Abdullah. Having said that, they don't always do it that way in Vegas. We've seen situations where they've been ahead in the game, but they've still decided they're not happy with what their runner's doing, and they've gone across to the other guy. So it is entirely possible. We go into this game expecting Madison to start. He doesn't play particularly well. He gives you like 30 yards on the ground with no receptions, and all of a sudden, Amir Abdullah takes over the rest of the way, even though they're winning. So there's a massive amount of risk there with Madison. And how much upside is there? I mean, realistically, you can imagine a situation where he gets you 60 and 70 yards and a touchdown. So you're getting, 10, 11 half PPR points. But with someone like a Jalen McMillan, realistically, he only needs to get you 4 receptions for 60 yards, and all of a sudden he's nearly there. So I would prefer to go for McMillan. I think in anything where you're getting points per reception, you tend to want to go for the wide receiver anyway. And in that situation, I definitely would.
Yeah, I think the upside, so there's not a lot. The tough part about the season with the Raiders is that Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, then they went Desmond Ridder. And I do think there's a little bit, when you saw that little bit of a window for Aiden O'Connell is more willing to check down to his running backs. There was a little bit of a bump. I think if you're looking at kind of like the Pittsburgh game that they had where Madison found the end zone, had 5 targets, 5 receptions, that kind of makeshift kind of game. Listen, the Jags are an absolute slam dunk matchup of running backs. So I do think that if they're a favorite, if Aiden O'Connell plays and Aiden O'Connell's tendency to check down a little bit, I think there's a world where I'm going to make the wrong decision and start Alexander Mattison. So I'm just saying that's what I'm thinking is going to happen here. But yeah, I think McMillan's probably the guy where I'll probably just play him. Ben, I didn't get your thoughts about McMillan. What's your thoughts about him this week?
I totally agree. McMillan is emerging as a viable option. He's kind of, they're going, it was Kate Odden for a while. There was a situation where it was very Kate Odden heavy, but Jalen McMillan was injured during that time and he wasn't fully healthy. And I think we're now seeing that McMillan is back and healthy. He suddenly is the clear number 2 in this offense. It certainly meant that Kate Odden's relatively taken a big step back. They're also trying to get the ball a little bit further downfield. So I think McMillan's fine. I'll rank him somewhere between 40 and 50 probably this week, which means you're probably only starting him if you've really been hit by injuries or if you're in a really deep league.
Yeah, well, that's me, so I'm excited. All right, let's get into some questions before we close out the show. Daniel joined the show. He just popped in and said, hey, guys, I'm enjoying the show. Good evening. By the way, tip of the cap, sitting back, enjoying the show. We appreciate you for being on, man. A lot of fun. Tyler, we just kind of broke down a little bit of this, but thoughts on Ford. Is he good because he's a Brown? Basically, Tyler's letting us know that Browns are terrible and you don't want to start them. But obviously we kind of have, I think there's Jerome Ford. There's going to be, we kind of already saw what Jerome Ford, I did want to pull this up because Ford, DTR, I mean, technically played half the game against the Cincinnati Bengals a few weeks ago. And I was just curious to see what happened. I think Nick Chubb played, though, so that's not going to really help us that much. But it was week 7, that game. And, wow, that was – all 3 quarterbacks played, which is hilarious. And then the targets really went, wow, Tillman and Njoku. Yeah, Chubb had 5 targets. Oh, sorry, 3 targets. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of stayed away from it. I think Ben's idea of the Bengals being a streamer defense might be more appealing to me. The one thing I always worry about with mobile quarterbacks, Dorian Thompson-Robinson will run the football, is they're less likely to check down. So take that for what it's worth. But does anybody have like a hot take on Jerome Ford really this week? Or you're kind of like break glass, start him if you need to?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a situation where you're just scrambling for someone to take, fill in for Kamara and you need to get Miller, Ford is an option. I mean, just workload in snaps. He's going to be on the field. He's going to have the potential for workload. So I'm, deep league, running back 2, or if you're just out of options for a flex play, I think he's worthwhile.
Ford or McMillan?
Oh, it's going to be McMillan for me.
Nice.
McMillan's is my. I had him down here as well. He's my slam dunk flex
Woo!
play. Yeah.
All right. I can't wait to watch that. I can't wait to watch Cooper Rush and Jalen McMillan lead me to a fantasy title.
I mean, that's yeah. I mean, we should get a monster game from Evans, and like you said, that's just going to open it up for McMillan. So I'm really high on him this week. I think there's an opportunity there. He had 13 targets and 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So even if we keep ups, in that area, you're going to have a good fantasy day.
All right. Yeah, I would say from your standpoint, Ben, I mean, I guess like who is your ideal, like the number 1 name that comes to your mind where you're like, you think they're actually more of a start than a sleeper. You're like, this guy, I'm in. Like just how Derek's displaying McMillan, who's that one guy that really you feel confident about this week?
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, for me, I mentioned him earlier. It's Keenan Allen. Like, I think if you've got Keenan Allen, you have to start Keenan Allen this week. Not just in PPR, but basically in any league. I think he's going to be certainly top 30, maybe even top 25 for me. And that's not been the case at any other time this season. This is the week. If you're rostering Keenan Allen, this is the week to start him.
Yeah. Quick thought from Tyler here as well. Watson or Reed this week. Obviously, New Orleans, interesting. And by the way, the fact you didn't even put in Dobbs, come on, what are we talking about here? Romeo had 2 touchdowns last week. Show some love. Me and Ben actually did a show a few weeks ago about playoff preview. We both talked about Watson and Romeo Dobbs here. I think all the toughest part about the Packers, in my opinion, is that game, I worry about the volume from Jordan Love. I could see a scenario where he throws the ball 21 times and completes 16 of them, and they get spread around amongst everybody. And by the way, Josh Jacobs catching 4 passes. And, just my opinion is Spencer Rattler doesn't make me feel like he's going to come out swinging here on the road in Lambeau to push the volume up here. But what's your kind of thought here, Ben, about the Watson over Reed or Reed Packers passing game, I guess, as a whole?
So the return of Romeo Dobbs absolutely kills Christian Watson. Previously, Watson, when Dobbs was out, Dontavian Wicks goes and plays the Z receiver role by himself. And then Christian Watson can play the X receiver, and obviously Reed's in the slot and only plays in 11 personnel. Now, the problem is when Dobbs returns, Dobbs becomes the Z receiver, and all of a sudden Wicks is splitting the X receiver role with Christian Watson. What happened earlier in the season, it was their plan from the start of the season. When all 4 receivers have been healthy, that's what's happened. So anytime all 4 are healthy, all of a sudden Watson's only playing 60 to 70% snaps, sometimes even less. Now, admittedly, Wicks is usually playing on the running downs and Watson's playing on the receiving downs, but it's still enough of a concern that you're suddenly not having Watson out there on a third of the snaps that you have to drop him down in your rankings. Now, I don't like Reed either. I like neither of these guys. I think Dobbs is a solid option. I might even have Dobbs ranked higher of all 3, but realistically, probably avoiding all 3 at the moment.
Derek, any Packers receivers stand out to you?
Yeah, if it's going to be any, it's going to be Dobbs. So yeah, I'm the same way, and we knew this coming into the season, and here we are, week 16, and we're talking about it still. Which receiver, gets the distribution of 21 passes. We don't really know. I mean, it's just it's hard to pick one over the other two in any case because there's just so many variables at play, and we just don't know. So that's just a situation that I really want to avoid. But if I do have to pick one, it's going to be Dobbs.
Yeah, the other thing for me is I would almost start a guy like McMillan over one of these guys. I don't know. I don't know who it's going to be. It's last week's a really good example of it. Just ended up being Romeo Dobbs who caught 2 touchdowns. He had 3 catches for 40 yards. That's it. But 2 of them were touchdowns. Fantasy football is a fickle beast. There's nothing, by the way, when we do our analysis, 3 for 40's terrible. That's a terrible game. But if 2 of those are touchdowns, that's an amazing play. And you look like an idiot for not being high on that guy. But in reality, that's super fluky that 2 of them were touchdowns. And then you look at the rest of the guys, 3 for 56, 5 for 34. And by the way, this whole entire Packers offense runs through Josh Jacobs. When you watch the game, especially early on, the Packers are running the football down people's throats, and so it takes the air out of the football. So just these 2 guys, if I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to probably depend. In PPR, I might just take Reed and call it a day. But if I'm the 6th seed and I'm playing the 1 seed and I need an upside play, I'll take Watson and take the shot. Because, listen, for what it's worth, 21 routes versus 25 for Dobbs for Watson, 6 targets, which was second highest on the team. He did have 56 yards receiving, which is solid. Is it great? No. But at the same time, with Watson it only takes 1 long one and you hit. So I would say in this format, it's PPR specific. By the way, the Saints defense, you could pretty much beat them anywhere. It's not like it's a slot versus wide. Either one works. So I think at full PPR, I think Reed's going to get peppered with some targets. He's going to be fine. Probably the safer floor. And Watson gives you the more ceiling in half PPR. That's how I would take this one there for Tyler. All right. I think that's all we got, folks. Pretty much on today's show, I want to appreciate Derek. And by the way, before we close out the show, let's have a little fun here. Give me your Week 16, call your shot. About a player maybe we discussed. It could be a stud. It could be a dud. Just call your shot. Give me a shot call here for you, Derek. Who's one guy? And I'll give you mine. If you're betting, please just bet on Mike Evans. For the love of God. I'm telling you, it's going to be the easiest bet you'll ever make. He's going to put up, by the way, his fantasy score, his receiving yards line. Mike Evans is my call for the week. Just bet on him. He's going to do awesome. He's trying to get 1,000 yards, and Baker knows that too. What's your thoughts, Derek?
Well, I've got 2 that I'm thinking about. Anthony Richardson, we haven't talked about him in a long time. He's kind of quietly, holding his own and hosting the Titans. I think Anthony Richardson could be a sneaky quarterback play this week. And I also like Aaron Jones against the Seahawks, with Minnesota. He's coming on at the right time. That would be another one where I just think that he's probably going to, 70 yards and a touchdown is probably realistic for him.
Where would you rank Anthony Richardson amongst the Cooper Rush, Matthew Stafford, Drake Mays that we discussed?
I would put him above all 3 of those.
Jesus Christmas. Ben, you feel the same way?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, you guys suck. Just when I thought we were good, I was good. I was going to play some Cooper Rush, feel very confident and safe, go to bed sleeping very nicely. Now Anthony Richardson's on my waiver wire. So now I got to figure that out. Thank you both.
Wait a second. You're in a 6-point passing touchdown league, right?
Correct.
Oh, then I'd probably go Rush.
See, this is what I'm talking about. God forbid these guys. You know what I mean? They're just all over the place. I don't even know why we do the show. It's ridiculous. All right, Ben, give me your shot call. Who do you got?
Look, this is going to sound a little bit wild. Travis Etienne against the Raiders. He kind of took back over as the starting role. You never really know who's going to be starting against them, but it's going to be a close enough game that they're going to be able to keep running the ball. I think Etienne probably scores a touchdown. I think he probably gets a lot of receptions, especially with Mac Jones. So, look, you need a deep option. I think he's going to do better than people expect. I know that's not much, but you expect him to do nothing. I think he does something.
Love that. By the way, I love that when you feel like when they give one running back 18 carries the one week and then the next week they do the complete opposite. It's super fun. I see Denver Broncos running backs this year. It's been just super fun. And by the way, no Jaleel McLaughlin this week, so I'm sure we'll get that one wrong either way. Quick one there. Is everybody in on McMillan over Reed? Yes or no? Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, McMillan over Reed. There you go. That's all we got today, folks. I want to thank both my co-hosts today, Derek Favret and Ben Wiseman. Make sure you give them a follow at Derek_Favret on Twitter, at Fantasy First Down. Make sure you check out all their great content on Razzball and also check out the site Fantasy First Down for Ben Wiseman. We do appreciate all his contributions here. And by the way, you guys both have articles coming out this week, Streamers and Stashes, Slot versus Wide. Derek, you got your Week 16 kind of primer going on, right?
Yep.
Something going on for me?
Yep, we'll see that.
Love that.
End of the week. Yeah.
Love it. All right. Thank you guys for joining. And if you have extra time on your hands, make sure you go follow at Razzball.com. Jump over there. Check out all the great tools. Join us on Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff and go follow me at Bobby Lamarco on Twitter. Thank you for joining once again, folks. We are out of here.